To young service members, the idea of building wealth might seem like a pipe dream. They don't earn very much and often have high borrowing and housing costs, but it's never too early to start. For some pointers, we turn to the president of the Navy Mutual Aid Association, retired Navy Admiral Brian Luther. Admiral Luther, or is it Mr. Luther? Good to have you with us.
Glad to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
And this idea of building wealth, I mean, this is what we tell our kids when they get their first job. Start saving. Sometimes they start out as young stockbrokers. That's one thing. Sometimes they start out as young service members. That's something else.
It is. And I like how you phrased it. Start saving now. There are some things that are common for wealth building for people in and out of the military. And then there are some things that are unique to the military. The military has some tax advantages, tax-free benefits that they can do. But regardless of service, in service or out, you should start now, right? There's a proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? Today, 20 years ago, the next best time is today. So starting today and putting time on your side and the benefit of compound interest. If you start now, time and compound interest will take care of the rest.
And what's a good rule of thumb for saving what you can, or $1 a week, $10 a week? I mean, how do you get started?
So there's two things we tell people. One is you start with a plan. And the plan will include a budget, right? So you can understand what it is. And the second thing is it's not the amount you put in, it's the frequency. And so for a young sailor, soldier, airman, Marine, just starting out, they can expect that they're going to get periodic longevity and pay increases or cost of living increases or pay increases with promotions. So if you have established the habit of saving, and then each time you get a pay raise and you take a portion of that pay raise and put it into your investments and the other goes into your budget, you will always get a pay raise. You will always increase your investments, and you'll never take a pay cut to protect your future. That's the first thing we tell people.
Right. And does the military offer mechanisms that make it easy to have that, say, deduction from your paycheck so that it becomes automatic?
Yes, they do. They start out with the thrift savings plan, which is very similar to a 401k. It has matching. So we recommend to young people never miss the match, because that's free money, right? So you should start, if it's a 5% match, you should work to get up to 5% as quickly as possible. And it comes out of your paycheck and allows the military member to pay themselves first.
And from the standpoint of the military service member specifically, give us a picture of what, especially someone that is a lower rank or starting out in the military, maybe the first few years in, what does their financial life look like relative to someone in the private sector, which may have different structure to their economic lives?
Sure. So depending on the service, when I mentioned about the tax-free benefits, they could have housing paid for. They can have their food paid for, right, if they're living on base. And so they can get these at a discount. Their military care is provided to them. There's no requirement for disability insurance because all that medical, all that risk that you cover with your different insurances, medical and disability and whatnot, they're all covered by the military. So when they come in, most of the room and board costs are covered for them. And then it's what they do with the rest of the money and where our education efforts are, because there are numerous predatory lenders that now that they know there's somebody with a guaranteed paycheck, that they try and get them into a loan or a car or something at a ridiculous, price and a loan amount. And then the sailor is obligated, and that consumes too much of their income.
Right. That's a good piece of advice to go along with the savings is cost avoidance. And everybody would like to have that $75,000 Ford F-150 Lariat. And I'm sure there's a dealer near every base that would loan them at 3, 4, 5% for 7 years. But then you're buying the truck 3 times.
Right. Except they'll do it at 7, 8, 9% because these young people don't have the credit history. And so they have a low credit score because they haven't built up their history. And so they will explain that the sailor is a risk and they have to pay for that risk. Whereas if they went to any military affiliated credit union or military affiliated bank, they would get a much better deal. But those lenders work to keep them in that ecosystem and then take advantage of them.
What is it that Dave Ramsey says, the well-known, radio financial consultant, is if you want to be broke all your life, put money into automobiles.
Sure. Yeah. Or in my case, a boat, right?
Yeah, that's right. You haven't sold it yet to have the really best day of your life then, correct?
Right. Yeah. So a hole in the water you pour money in.
We're speaking with Brian Luther. He is a retired Navy admiral and president of the Navy Mutual Aid Association. And so that's the young service member. What about someone early middle career that might have received officer status? They're getting moved around to different assignments. Then you may have rent and housing costs come into the picture.
Right. So again, we'll start with the benefits work your entire career. So even at a senior rank, sometimes there's base housing, but even if there's not, there's the basic allowance for housing that is correlated to the region that you're in. So they will give you enough money to rent a house. So you can move to these different areas and your total compensation will increase so that you can live inside an acceptable house in that area. So you don't necessarily have to go out of pocket just because the military is making you move to these other areas. The other thing is when they start, as you say, as you get older, maybe you have a spouse, maybe you have kids, you have this house, you are making a little extra money. Your investment plan, because remember we started with a plan, now you should be thinking about creating different investment other than the TSP, because that's a qualified tax account. If you need to put a down payment on a house, it's harder to get that money out than if you started an investment account. So you can start, as you get a little bit older, you can say, okay, I'm putting some money in TSP, but I need a brokerage account, so I have this access, and that can double down. We recommend people have a rainy day fund, an emergency fund. For the military, they let you store a bunch of leave or PTO, and your contract time generally is measured in years. So you don't have that concern where I could get laid off all of a sudden. So the demands for emergency fund while you're active duty or under contract can be a little bit low, but you still want a rainy day fund in case you have those emergent expenses, tires, the refrigerator goes, something along those lines.
Yeah, so as you get older, you might acquire a spouse and family and so forth, then you would need liquid assets, more liquid than the TSP.
Sure, absolutely. And the consideration for, like in our case, we'll talk to them about life insurance because sometimes military members go in harm's way. And so as you have this family in the house, you're concerned about how is my family going to be taken care of once I go into harm's way. So that's part of your plan. And those assets in the beginning and that risk protection you're doing carry different roles. So in the beginning, you're trying to replace you should you not come back. And then at the end, it's how can this help my retirement or place income for my spouse if I pass first.
And getting back to the TSP then, just like any other federal employee, as you get older, progress through your career, your risk profile changes, and therefore your mix of funds that you invest in should probably change. But I guess our rule of thumb here is always avoid too much dependence on the G fund.
Sure. So TSP is good for a couple of reasons. The first, we tell people it's got very low costs. I have a little acronym when we give talks. It's RETIRE, when I talk about risk, education, taxes, investments, retirement planning, and estate planning. And so when you talk about education and investments, you can be overwhelmed with all the information that's out there. So the advantage of TSP is the simplicity, right? But you should educate yourself at what's in the fund. To your point, the G fund or the F fund. And so the TSP can make it simple for you and give you a target date fund that you can invest in. Or if you want to have a little more control, you can say, I'd like to invest in a large cap and small cap, fixed income. But again, to your point, as you progress down your financial life journey, when you're younger and you have a long time horizon, maybe I'm higher in equities. When I'm closer to retirement, I want a little less volatility and a little more fixed income. So TSP will offer you that.
And for those in the military, it might be, I would think, wise to consider Roth IRA types of investments because often after a 20-year career, you still have a lot of working years left and you might have higher income at that point.
You do. And that's why the T in that RETIRE acronym is taxes. And if you haven't mapped out your plan, again, to your point, the Roth will phase out. So there's a window of opportunity to put that Roth into place, right, that you can do it. You can always, use a backdoor method, but you have to understand your usage of IRA. And so that's how you get that money in. And so when you retire, and so a federal employee can have their federal employment, they can have their Social Security, they can have their investment income. Remember, if you're got $1 million in TSP, you're really $750,000 because that's a taxable account. And that money is going to get taxed at ordinary income, maybe $800,000 depending on your tax bracket. bracket. But again, you have to figure out where am I going to take money and when am I going to take money to minimize the taxes that I want to pay. You may want to pay as much taxes. I'm not that guy. I want to minimize my tax so I can maximize what I'm able to spend in my retirement.
And do you know of any, we have a term here coined by our late correspondent, Mike Causey, of